Greetings, everyone. Welcome. My name is Eric Hintz, and I'm the acting director of the Smithsonian's Lemelson Center for the Study of Invention and Innovation. And I really want to thank everyone for your patience. I'm sorry that we're having some technical difficulties this afternoon. We're really excited to present a nice Innovative Lives program with Dr. Harry Edwards in conversation with Dr. Damion Thomas from the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And while we're waiting for Doc to get connected, I'll go ahead and introduce Dr. Thomas, and maybe he can tell us a little bit about Doc while we're waiting to get started. So let me do that. It's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Dr. Damion Thomas. Damion is a curator of sports at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, where his work explores the connections between sports, history, and social movements. So, Damion, thanks for hanging in there with some of these technical difficulties. Appreciate you being able to riff with me here for a little while. But while we're trying to get Doc connected, tell us when you first met Doc and how you know him.
Well, first met him through his work. Anybody that studies the cultural, political, social significance of sports has been introduced to Dr. Edwards. Certainly his book, The Sociology of Sport, which helped create the field of the sociology of sports, influential work. But perhaps more importantly for me, it was his book, The Revolt of the Black Athlete, where he chronicled all of the ways in which African American athletes had responded to this new moment where we first had a critical mass of African Americans integrating predominantly white institutions in the 1960s. And that book provided a model for people to engage with the larger meaning and significance of sports. I got a chance to work with him much more closely when I was named the guest curator for the National Museum of African American History and Culture for the Sports Gallery, and I had to develop a scholarly advisory committee. And I couldn't imagine anyone more fitting to have to serve as an advisor to me as I was working on that project. I probably didn't have to formally name him because so much of his work had influenced what I was already doing in the gallery. But to be able to sit around the table with him and some of the other leading scholars in this field and to debate the topic and to frame how we would share that history was an incredible moment. And I think without the influence of Dr. Edwards and others, the gallery wouldn't be what it is today. And for me, when I was curating the exhibition, I didn't want it to be a hall of fame. I didn't want it to be a gallery about sports. Rather, I wanted it to be a gallery which attempts to tell African American history through the lens of sports. And so I really wanted to create a gallery that was for non-sports fans. And I think that's been the brilliance of Doc's work is that he's been able to bring a topic to life for people who have no interest in the games. And so that's how I first met him. And over the last decade, he's been one of my most trusted confidants and strategist and someone who has made me a better scholar, a better curator, a better teacher. And so I've benefited tremendously from his influence in my life.
That's amazing. And thank you for sharing that background. And if folks haven't had a chance, I strongly encourage you to visit the National Museum of African American History and Culture here in Washington, D.C. Definitely check out the gallery. Tell us what the name of the gallery is again.
Sports leveling the playing field.
Leveling the playing field. And one of the prominent things you'll see in there is that moment from there's a statue depicting the moment from the 1968 Olympics, Summer Olympics in Mexico City, where the sprinters Tommy Smith and John Carlos raised their fists in the Black Power salute. And as I hope we'll learn if we can get connected to Doc here, he'll talk about his influence and how that moment came about. Um, Damon, maybe you could give us a little bit of a preview when we get Doc connected, whether by cell phone or by Zoom. Give us a little preview of a couple of things that you're hoping to chat with him and about today, and for the benefit of our audience, what's to come.
Yeah. I've got a chance to conduct an oral interview of Dr. Edwards a couple of years ago. So I went through that document and rereading it and revisiting it, and I came up with about 50 questions. Then I narrowed it down to about 12. And as I was talking with people from the Lemelson Center, realized that over 120 questions had been submitted. And so I went through those questions as well. And so I have a lot of things I want to get to. I hope we can get Doc on quickly. There are probably about 30 questions I want to ask him about. Some of it's from his background. Some of it is related to the work he did in the 1960s. But then I also want to get to some contemporary questions as well. The question we got asked more than any other was about the NCAA and name, image, and likeness and the transfer portal. So I want to get into that, the contemporary role of athletes, and also, if we have time, to reflect on the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, whether you have some thoughts for us about the preceding 250 years or some things he would like us to work on in the next 250 years.
Tell us a little bit about, like, give us kind of like the capsule biography of Dr. Edwards. Like, and I've got one prepared, which I could read, but I thought I would, since you know him so well and you've known him for years, I thought maybe you could just tell us, what is it that makes Doc so important, so impactful? Kind of what's some nuggets from his biography that we should know, just sort of as an introduction to Dr. Harry Edwards.
Sure. I think it's important to really look at his story. He grew up in East St. Louis in the aftermath of one of the most devastating race riots in American history, the 1917 riots in East St. Louis. So as African Americans were coming back from fighting in World War One, many of them were accosted and beaten, and it was a form of intimidation. And in the aftermath of that, East St. Louis went from being a thriving community to being one of the most difficult communities in this country to grow up. Doc is also a contemporary of Emmett Till. He was the same age as
Mhm.
Emmett Till when Emmett Till, who was also from the Midwest, went down south. And so that's a moment that is etched in his memory as well. And from there, he went on to become a nationally ranked discus thrower, competed at San Jose State. And he was a student athlete, and he's part of that first generation where we have a critical mass of African Americans now attending those predominantly white colleges and universities. And when you get that critical mass, and it's not one or two, now there has to be a response to the needs of those athletes.
Mhm.
And so there were disruptions on college campuses all over the country. And so he was involved in them at San Jose State. He led a boycott of a football game, and it was the first football game that was ever canceled because of boycott at San
Wow.
Jose State. So from very early on, he was an activist. And then after being a student athlete at San Jose State, went on to work on his master's degree and PhD. And while doing that, continued to organize athletes to help them fight for their rights, to fight for classes, also to fight for African American studies on college campuses across this country. So he really started as an athlete activist, and then from there moved on to become a scholar. He went to Cornell University, and studied sociology, becoming one of the pioneers of the sociology of sport. And then in a 3-year period, wrote three critically important and crucial books that have really reshaped how we think about sports and its role in our society. And after that, he became a professor at the University of California at Berkeley, one of the leading public institutions in this nation, and has continued to advise athletes, um, sports organizations, and others trying to use sports to create a more just and and fair society. Okay. So there's a lot of things we want to get to, but the first thing I want to start with is your well-being. I know you've had some health challenges. Can you give us an update on where you are and how you're feeling?
Well, that one's been pretty much resolved, and it really comes down to managing it. And what that means is that this one solution eons ago. So it just so happens that it's my turn, and the issue becomes how I'm managing it, and I'm trying to manage it as well as I possibly could, trying to still contribute, get some things done, and so forth. But at the end of the day, I've never been more at peace or more comfortable with my circumstances than I am today, and absolutely no concerns about where I'm going from here. I'm trying to get as much done, in point of fact, I'm much more worried about the rest of y'all, given the circumstances that we're in this society.
Indeed, indeed. I definitely get it. I think back to some of your story and you talk about receiving hundreds of death threats, and in particular in an era where we saw a lot of violence, the death of Dr. King, the death of Medgar Evers and others. And so I would imagine that you would have made peace with your life a long time ago and the possibility of death.
Really about time. It's really about evolving perspectives. And, and so when I look sometimes the think through and following, I mean, we're looking at people like was murdered when she was 39. Look, some of the young people who were literally leaving the movement. 23, 24. Stokely Carmichael, who was 25. H. Rap Brown, who was like 20, who was like 23, 24. So time is only tangentially related to age. And it was at this point in my life that I determined factors of perspective and experience is what really counted. And when I wrote my autobiography at the age of 38, I felt that I was doing so pretty late because I wanted to speak to young people. I wanted to speak to young people within the context of their perspectives and experiences at that time. And I thought that autobiography was right on time, given who I wanted to speak to about the realities of life and struggle in American society. So as I go back and look at the people that helped form and mold my own life, some 15-year-olds whose life is already behind them. I know some 80-year-olds who are vigorous, active, engaged, contributing, looking forward to so forth. So it's a matter of perspective. And I was fortunate to learn that early, but I had some great teachers, people that I knew, Malcolm X, Dr. King, Angela, Rap Brown, Stokely Carmichael, all of those people. None of them were, like 65, 70. They were young people who had a dream and a commitment to pursue it.
Thank you. I want to get into some of the questions that so many people have asked. The overwhelming question that we've heard from the audience is they want to hear your thoughts about the current name, image, and likeness issues going on in college sports. What are your thoughts about this? Is it empowering for the athletes? Is it another way that they're being exploited? Or do you think that we're headed in the right direction in terms of this moment of collegiate athletes being empowered?
Former students at University of California at Berkeley, who became a state senator in California, Nancy Skinner, who never forgot a series of lectures that I did on the exploitation of collegiate athletes. And so when she became a state senator, she got together with Governor Newsom, and they put together the NIL, name, image, and likeness law. And once it passed in California, then every state had to do it, or all of the athletes would have been coming to California because they had an opportunity to literally be compensated for the contributions that they made to these institutions. And once it was adopted nationwide, a major problem emerged, which was the management of it. The idea that athletes should be compensated beyond simply an athletic scholarship, and there's never probably been a more contradictory term, because at one point, 70% of the athletes who went to college on scholarship never graduated. So at the end of the day, this was something that I think is a great idea, but like most great ideas, once it expands, that expansion could very easily turn into a situation that has metastasized, which means that it's out of control, unmanaged, and so forth. And the same people who were not paying athletes, compensating them justly for the millions of dollars that they brought into these institutions, are in control of NIL. And so what we have is a management problem, not a fundamental issue of athletes being compensated. Everybody else in that realm of athletics, collegiate athletics, is organized. They have coaches associations, AD associations, even equipment and manager associations. And at the end of the day, until athletes get organized and have a seat at the table where they can have some input into how this situation is going to be managed with regard to NIL, we're going to have a situation not of expansion and progress in terms of duly compensating athletes. We're going to have a situation of metastasis, which is a situation gone crazy and with nobody in control.
Your response to this reminds me of many of the things that you've been talking about for so long, the empowerment of athletes. In the 1960s, you helped create the sociology of sports. And that was something that you were challenged with, that your committee told you that you couldn't do it. Why was it so important for you to write about the cultural, political, and social significance of sports in America?
My research at Cornell University, and I had some great instructors. They just didn't always have the vision that that was required in order to really help me in terms of the project that I had chosen. My research while I was a student at Cornell University demonstrated to me that not only was sport not the Toy Department of Human Affairs, but that it was a critical and in some instances essential institution that that helped us to maintain social solidarity, communal identity, and so forth, even to this day, despite all of the divisions and so forth in this country. I mean, Malcolm X said in 1960 that the most segregated hour in American society is Sunday at 12 noon. Well, that might be the case. But at 1 o'clock on Sunday, that's the most integrated and unified time in American society during football season, because you have literally millions of people tuning in to NFL football games. You have stadiums packed with people of all perspectives and outlooks, black, brown, white, old, young, male, female, all wearing in my case out here, they're 49 a gear. And if they lose, they leave the stadium and say, hey, we lost. We'll get them next time. So sport is a major factor in terms of creating a sense of community and unity. It's a major factor in terms of social cohesion. And so that is what drove me to write my dissertation, despite being told that if I wrote a dissertation on something called the sociology of sport, I'd be laughed out of the discipline. Well, nobody's laughing today. I was looking at the news yesterday, and people referenced not only John Carlos and Tommy Smith, but also the sociology of sport in terms of what we know about sport and why perhaps these winter Olympic athletes are speaking out saying that they represent the United States. They don't necessarily represent the people who are in control of the federal government in this nation today. So all of this has come full circle, and I'm simply happy that people understand that to understand sport, to look and really analyze sport, you have a window on society that is virtually unparalleled in terms of the honesty and integrity of what's going on. So I think that has proven to be a valuable contribution.
In terms of your own experiences as a student athlete, can you tell us a bit about what was it like to be a student at San Jose State at a critical moment where we're starting to see large numbers of African Americans go to these predominantly white institutions? And then how did that influence your activism?
Well, the 1960s were a particularly critical time in American society. And my first 4 years, 1960 to 1964, in that decade, I spent at San Jose State University. But we were there principally to play sports. I had to petition to major in sociology, which I was determined to do, because even at that stage, I understood that there was more than just Jesse Owens, Jackie Robinson, and Joe Lewis, and geez, everybody should in the black community to strive to be like them. I saw more even at that point. And so I wanted to major in sociology so that I could study sports, so that I could dive deeper into sport using the assets of that field. And of course, people said, hey, there's no such thing as, the sociology of sport, what you're talking about. And so that was one driving factor that people told me that's something that I was looking at, that I was aware of, that I was involved in point of fact, did not exist. We also have to understand that the outside issues were impacting sport even at that time. There was a burgeoning civil rights movement at the year that I entered college in 1960. Dr. King had already been involved in the 1956 Montgomery bus boycott movement. Malcolm X was already beginning to speak and be heard as a member of the Nation of Islam. So these changes were also going on, and it became clear to me, particularly with the rise of Muhammad Ali in 1960 after the Rome Olympics, and by 1962 and 63 when he knocked out Sonny Liston and so forth, that's what was happening in society was coming over the stadium wall and through the pavilion turnstiles. And to the extent that there was tension between what sport put forth, this idea of it's not what color you are, only how well you play the game, competitiveness, discipline, character, mental fitness, physical fitness, most certainly political allegiance to the nation, patriotism, and religiosity, to the extent that what was coming over the stadium wall contradicted that, you were going to have athletes speak out and so forth. It's going to come over the stadium wall and through the pavilion turnstiles. So I was becoming increasingly aware of that. even as people told me there's nothing there to see. Sport is the tar department of human affairs. And by the time that I was writing my dissertation at Cornell University, and they told me I'd be laughed out of discipline if I wrote my dissertation on the sociology of sport, as I told my committee at the time, somebody here is crazy, and it's not me. And so they said, okay, you can go ahead and write your dissertation on it. It turned out to be 1,105 pages because they kept sending it back. Are you certain that sport permeates the basic cultural fabric of society and is an institution? Yes. Well, prove it to us. And so I had to take off and write on that. So at the end of the day, my journey has been one of fighting a battle for what I knew to be a valid analysis of a long neglected and important institution in modern societies. I think that time has proven me to have been correct in terms of that struggle.
Based on your research and your experience as an activist, do you believe that all athletes have a responsibility to be politically engaged?
No, I think that ultimately it's not so much a choice as a circumstance. What generates both movements and the individuals who lead and articulate their goals and methods are conditions. And conditions can vary tremendously, even in the same era, for different individuals. And so if you have athletes at historically Black institutions, they're unlikely to have the same perspectives on contradictions between the idealized values and sentiments projected through sports and what they actually see in societies and in the institutions that they're representing. And so it's not accidental that it has been preeminently athletes who were outside of the HBCU system that utilize athletics to express their concern about developments in society. You have Muhammad Ali, but Muhammad Ali never went to college. America was his university. The Nation of Islam was his graduate school. So at the end of the day, conditions generate both movements and the people to articulate their goals and methods. And so the conditions of each era are always different. This is why Bill Russell was not Earl Lord or Chuck Cooper. This is why Jim Brown was not Kenny Washington or Woody Strode. This is why Smith and Carlos were not Jesse Owens. This is why Muhammad Ali was not Joe Louis. So each era generates its representative voices as well as the movements that they become involved in and whose goals they articulate and project. So this is simply an axiom of the sociology of sport. It's conditions that generate these circumstances, that generate these speakers, that generate these representatives, and not individual choice of people coming out of the blind, nowhere unaffected, no understanding, no involvement, and all of a sudden speaking up and speaking out. So every athlete is not obligated to speak out. And in point of fact, some of them, as we learned in each era, would be better off just sitting down and shutting up.
I want to follow up on that and to ask a related question because I think about some of the things that you wrote earlier in your career, some of your interactions with athletes who didn't necessarily agree with your perspective, your methods, your tone, things of that nature. In particular, I'm thinking about Arthur Ashe, and a couple of people have asked about Arthur Ashe. And I wonder if you now look back at athletes who might have taken a different approach differently and to the extent to which you can you can kind of see things through their particular lens.
Arthur Ashe and I, we're good friends. Something would come out, and Arthur would get on the phone and call me and say, Harriet said, look, man, they're getting ready to pass this Proposition 48 without any consideration or input from the African American sports community. I'm for enhanced educational support and requirements and enforcement and so forth, but I'm not for inequitable, in point of fact, discriminatory such efforts. So I just want to talk to you about what your perspective is on it. So I was talked to Arthur, and I said, well, Arthur, I think that, first of all, we need to get the word out in terms of what's really going on with Proposition 48. And I remember writing an article, I forget what magazine, what journal it was in, but it was called Education and the Black Athlete. And so my perspective on it was that we've got to educate people and then move ahead to get them to understand the broader implications and so forth of Proposition 48. Arthur would come out and say, well, you can take that position, I'm going to take this position. And he'd be so far beyond me in terms of the radicalness of his perspective. I said, Arthur, man, how do you expect to get that through? He said, because they'll listen to me. And he was right. I mean, we went to a conference down at University of California, California State University at Northridge. I forget what year it was. And I got up and spoke. And after I spoke, people were saying, that damn Edwards, here he goes, he opened another can of worms, and people are going to believe that stuff. Arthur spoke after I did, and he was so much further out than I was. I said, man, how can you stand up and say some stuff like that? And people got up afterwards and said, oh boy, that Arthur Ashe, isn't he brilliant? What a great guy! What a wonderful man. Arthur had a sweetness about him. He had an intellectual depth about him that was almost seductive. When I walk in the room, 6'8", bald, shades, a full-length leather coat, and one thing and another, people start backing up against the wall. Arthur could have walked in with a machine gun, and they'd have walked up and hugged him, and how you doing, man? How things go? Because that was just Arthur. He had that feature about him. So he and I were very good friends, and oftentimes he'd call me and say, well, you take that position because I'm going way out on the other end. Great, and that was Arthur Ashe.
I also want to ask you about different generations. I think about the civil rights movement. And every generation after the civil rights movement, in some ways, has been negatively compared to the civil rights movement. And people say, well, why aren't you like them? Perhaps not until the Black Lives Matter generation. I wonder if you could offer us a comparison and a contrasting of these two particular movements. What people have been able to do more recently, and how does it relate to your particular era?
Again, to go back, it is conditions that generate movements, and the people, the leaders who articulate their goals and establish their methods. The civil rights movement evolved during an era prior to even the flip phone, much less the vast access to computers and the internet and the social media and so forth. And what that did was to allow the mainstream media, which was the basic conduit for disseminating broad-scale public interpretations of information and what was going on, to frame up a movement so that you had particular leaders. So there was Dr. Martin Luther King. You had Malcolm X. You had the NAACP and the Congress of Racial Equality, and SNCC, and so forth. But everybody knew the faces that fronted, and the personalities and perspectives that fronted those organizations, thanks largely to the mainstream media. Today, you have the social media and you have the internet. You have a flood of information, and far too often that flood turns into a tsunami. And the result is that people are awash in information. If you talk to 10 people about who is a leader of the Black Lives Matter movement, if they could come up with anybody, they would all be different, because it depends upon where you are and what you're involved in, what your focus is, and so forth, because there's so much information out there. And it would have been the same in the 1950s and 60s had we had an internet and the social media. Dr. King was not the only rising leader in the late 1950s and 60s. There were others, but the mainstream media focused in on him. Malcolm X was his probably most noted competitor for the leadership crown and setting the course and content of a viable human rights and civil rights movement. But Malcolm was never a darling of the mainstream media. They did not press forward on him. And in point of fact, when Dr. King began to talk about the Vietnam War and some of these other issues, he too was more and more isolated and pushed out of the mainstream media. So at the end of the day, the difference between today, the biggest difference between today and 25, 30 years ago, the civil rights movement and so forth, the biggest difference between these two eras, again, are the conditions and how those are arise and are articulated. The social media is a powerful force in the era, was a powerful force in the era of Black Lives Matter. The lack of a social media and dependence upon the mainstream media was a powerful force in the civil rights era. So conditions again dictate both the character of movements and the leaders and others who are brought forward to articulate the movement's goals and methods.
I want to go back to that. You talk about your sort of circumstances and things of that nature being really important. We know you as a firebrand, as someone who speaks truth to power, someone who is pushing institutions. And you've been able to do that as an outsider, but also as someone who's been able to work within and alongside institutions as well. And I'm thinking about your work with the NFL, with the 49ers, in particular, your efforts to get more African American coaches hired. Can you talk to us about that work and why we continue to struggle to get a representative number of African Americans in leadership positions in the world of sports?
Well, let me say something that the mainstream media, because I was a quote firebrand, uncompromising, and so forth, did not report to the extent that they could have and should have. I have always felt that if a major and strategic part of our struggle is not to convert adversaries, detractors, and the apathetic into allies, advocates, and activists, then what are we struggling for? To replace their repression and denigration and denunciation with our repression, denigration, and denunciation of them? So I've always felt that way. And so I had absolutely no problem in looking at a Colin Kaepernick who took a knee in protest of police violence against Black and brown people in American society, and Roger Goodell, who has always had a sense of obligation to push that issue, equity, justice, and so forth, in his role as commissioner. But he serves at the behest of 32 owners, many of whom have no interest in or concern about social justice. And so to talk to both Kaepernick and Roger Goodell was not a difficult issue for me, in the same sense that when the baseball figure from the Dodgers was kicked out behind saying that African Americans didn't have the necessities to be managers and presidents and so forth in Major League Baseball, I had no problem working with him, bringing him into the process of healing and rearranging. And the first thing I asked him was, who do you think has a tremendous upside in terms of becoming a potential manager in Major League Baseball who is black? The first words out of his mouth were Dusty Baker. And so we held a meeting with Dusty Baker and had Dusty hired by the San Francisco Giants rather than his organization, the Dodgers, because we didn't want this notion, well, that's the Dodgers just hiring Dusty Baker so they can cover up for Al Campanis's racism. We had the San Francisco Giants hire him. The Dodgers' main National League adversary. And so Dusty Baker was the result of pulling together two sides that seemed to have different perspectives on the same issue, but in point of fact, shared a lot of common ground. And I've always felt that way. We have an obligation to convert adversaries and critics and the apathetic into allies, into people who want to form coalitions to achieve common goals and interests, even though they may seem far apart. So I had no problem whatsoever talking to both Kaepernick and Roger Goodell. I had no problem whatsoever in talking to both Al Campanis and Dusty Baker and the Giants. And I've never had any problem working with the sports mainstream, whether it be the San Francisco 49ers and the NFL and Roger Goodell, who I think is a absolutely wonderful man, a good friend, working with Major League Baseball under Bart Giamatti and Peter Uberoth, are working with the NBA under David Stern. So I've always been of that mind, but people, once they brand you a firebrand, an irrational, a crazy, way out there personality, they say, yeah, but that's not what he does. But that is what I do. I'm just very, very militant about it.
Yeah. As you're advising Colin Kaepernick, you told him that there would be a price to pay for his activism. And that's true with a lot of the people from your generations and after, paid a tremendous price. And here today, we still celebrate so many of them. We still see you and Angela Davis and others actively involved, but so many others have not been able to maintain their well-being and in some ways have been really beat down by their involvement in the struggle. Do you have anything that you want to say about the cost of fighting for what's right?
In every era, there's been cost. Jackie Robinson, Larry Dover paid a cost. Bill Russell and Elgin Baylor paid a cost. Bill Russell was playing a basketball game in Lexington, Kentucky. They told him he couldn't eat in the cafeteria at the hotel where his white teammates were eating. And so he got on a plane and flew back to Boston, said, no, I'm not going to do what Elgin did last year when he was in Charlotte, West Virginia, and they wouldn't let him eat in the hotel cafeteria. He refused to play, but he sat on the bench in a suit while his teammates played, knowing that everybody who in that stadium came to see him play. Bill Russell said, I'm not going to do that. I'm going back to Boston. So he and the black players on the Celtics went back to Boston. Bill Russell's outcome was an angry outpouring of animosity from the mainstream media, many demanding that Walter Brown, who owned the Celtics, fire him, get rid of him. And from that point on, some of the even mainstream media began to refer to him as William Felton X. And so at the end of the day, there's always been a price. Jackie Robinson paid a price. Larry Doby paid a price. They had to turn the other cheek. Smith and Carlos paid a price. Jack Johnson paid a price. Went down to South America, won the heavyweight championship, came back to the United States, and there wasn't a soul there waiting on him when he brought the championship to the United States. The same with regard to Sonny Liston. He came back to the United States after winning a heavyweight championship, and there wasn't a soul in the airport waiting on him. They pay a price because part of achievement, if you are Black in American society, is animosity and antipathy, not because you didn't do your best, but simply because you achieved. That's part of it. And when you rebel, you really get grilled and challenged and condemned. So I don't know anyone, whether they were on the upside of simply doing what it was that they do best, or whether they were challenging the system, who did not pay a price. I paid a price. Immediately after the Olympic Project for Human Rights, I was fired from San Jose State. I was denied tenure at the University of California at Berkeley until President Carter got in touch with the chancellor of the university and said, hey, this is something that has to be corrected. We're getting newspaper reports from all over the world about what's going on here. And we need this corrected. So there's always been a price to pay. And I think that that's something that you simply sign up for when you step up and step out and say, as Smith and Carlos did, we are better than our presidents being murdered, than our civil rights leaders being murdered, than our children being bombed in churches and killed, than our presidential candidates being murdered. We're better than that as a people, and we have to do better than that as a nation. But they were condemned as a consequence of that.
One of the things that you and other leaders of the movement in the 1960s, the revolt of the Black athlete, have been criticized for was not creating enough space for women's voices to emerge. How do you respond to that criticism, and how would you assess the role of women athletes in this fight for social justice today?
First of all, there were women's voices that emerged. Wilma Rudolph, after she won 3 gold medals in the 1960 Olympics in Rome, returned to Clarksville, Georgia, and they wanted to do a parade for her. But there was going to be Black people on one side of the street and white people on the other because they were segregated down there. She said, no, I'm not going to be in a parade that does that. It's either integrated, first come, first serve, but I'm not going to do it. They said, okay, we'll settle for that. But when it comes down to the banquet that we're holding for you that night, we can't have Black folks eating at the same tables and around in the same arena as white folks. She said, if it's segregated, don't expect me to be there. So they cleaned that up. Wilma went on to help desegregate schools, desegregate housing, desegregate swimming pools in Clarksville, Tennessee. And she was seen as the darling of the 1960 Olympics, but once she took that tack, she was no longer the darling of anybody in her hometown and in much of the United States, and ended up, in point of fact, teaching a second grade class at the elementary school that she had attended in Clarksville. She was a voice that spoke out and stood up and made tremendous contributions in terms of the circumstances that she grew up in Clarksville, Tennessee. The reality on the broader scale is that women in American sport were essentially denied parity and access, and any woman that made significant statements and voiced concerns about gender and sport would find herself very quickly without a platform. It was not until 1972 and Title IX that women's sports at the collegiate level really began to blossom outside of the historically Black institutions. And when you realize that it wasn't just Title IX, but Roe v. Wade in 1973, following 1972's Title IX application, that women began to get athletic scholarships and so forth because these schools and institutions and even professional teams could have some assurance that if we gave this woman a contract in May, if we gave her athletic scholarship in May, she'd be around in the fall to start the academic year, and in March to play in March Madness, or in June to run in the NC2A championships, or to run in the Olympic trials. It was a combination of Title IX in 1972 and Roe v. Wade in 1973 that was really the foundation of the expansion and explosion of women's sports. And at that point, we began to have more women who were willing to speak out. But again, no one has an obligation to speak out. It comes down to what their circumstances are and how they interpret those circumstances. Having said that, let me say this. Women have been in the forefront of leadership in terms of speaking out. Before there was Bill Russell speaking out, before Elgin Baylor spoke out, before Muhammad Ali, there was a woman by the name of Rose Robinson who sat on a cooler in the Pan Am Games in Chicago in 1959 during the playing of the national anthem. That was almost 10 years before Smith and Carlos raised their fist in Mexico City during the playing of the national anthem. Before there was Colin Kaepernick, there was a young lady by the name of Ariana Smith from Knox College in Galesburg, Illinois, who went to a game that was being held in Staten, Missouri, about 12 miles from Ferguson, where Mike Brown was killed. And during the playing of the national anthem, she walked out onto the floor and laid down on the floor for 4 minutes and 20 seconds in commemoration and memorial to the 4 hours and 20 minutes that Mike Brown's body had laid in the gutter, the police not allowing his parents to come out and pick him up with his blood running into the sewer because it was a crime scene. She went out and protested that and was suspended, kicked off the basketball team and so forth for doing it. But she was doing that in 2014, which was 2 years before Colin Kaepernick took a knee over police violence in 2016. So women have always been leaders and in the forefront, but they were not just speaking on the occasion of an event. It was the conditions and their understanding and interpretation of those conditions that drove them to do so. And let me make one last statement about women in sport. Women and sport could very easily revert to previous circumstances because of the rescinding of Roe v. Wade. Like I said, Title IX made it an obligation for schools to give parity to women in sport, but it was Roe v. Wade that enabled that to happen with some assurance that it would work. With Roe v. Wade rescinded and with the threat to the pool, not so much active athletes who can fly to California, New York, or someplace else, which is a medical freedom, is a medical freedom state for women, and get the services that they need, but for the pool where these athletes come from, that pool is threatened as a result of the rescinding of Roe v. Wade and the closure of literally scores of clinics that service people across a metropolitan area, whether it was rural, whether it was urban, there were these services there and there were clinics there to do that. Many of those clinics have closed. And what that means is that a lot of young women are not going to be participating in sports and will not be given scholarships and so forth because that dependability factor brought by Roe v. Wade and the clinics that came with it is gone. I predict that within 5 years, we're going to be looking at an entirely different women's sports institution in America unless something is done about the right to medical services by women and girls in American society.
Doug, I got about 40 questions, but I'm going to ask a final one. I know that many today are mourning the death of the Reverend Jesse Jackson, who's a contemporary of yours. You were born in 1942. Jesse Jackson was born in 1941. I wonder if you have a story or a reflection you want to share on Reverend Jackson. And by extension, what do you hope that those in history remember about your generation?
Well, I've known Jesse Jackson since the 1960s. We're virtually the same age. I think he was 1 year older than I am. And we have had some moments of outright thigh-slapping laughter, and we've had some moments of contention. Jesse Jackson was not perfect, but neither was Dr. King or Malcolm X. Neither am I. But what I can say and will always treasure is the fact that he made a substantial contribution to the triumphs, to the efforts, to the definitions that moved and motivated and described an era in American history relative to moving toward forming that more perfect union. He was a major and contributing personality during his life. And I think that's about as much as can be said about anybody. I would be more than satisfied as I come to the end, as my train comes to the end of the line. If somebody just stood up and said, you know, one thing about the brother is he made a contribution. And that's what I say about Jesse Jackson. Was he perfect? No. Can you go and cherry pick some things that he did wrong or some aspects of his personality that you didn't like and so forth? So absolutely. But did he make a contribution? Without question. Jesse Jackson made a contribution.
And with that, can everyone join me in thanking Dr. Edwards for sharing his wisdom, his time, and his energy to helping make this world a better place?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'll talk to you later, Damon.
Thank you, Doc.
Goodness, that was amazing. Dr. Edwards, Dr. Thomas, thank you so much for a really amazing, thought-provoking, challenging conversation, amazing history lesson, just all the different things that Dr. Edwards has witnessed and contributed to over the decades of scholarship and activism. Truly amazing. And I want to thank you especially, Damion, for hanging in there with all the technical difficulties, thinking fast on your feet. I really appreciate you. Thank you so much. And as we conclude our program, I just have a handful of people to thank, several people who contributed to today's program. First, I'd like to thank the Andrew R. Abraham Foundation for supporting our Innovative Live series in 2026. I'd also like to thank my colleagues at the Lemelson Center who helped produce today's program, including Stephanie Fry, Jason Morris, Laura Havel, and Jesse Lovejoy. I'd especially like to thank you, our online audience, for all the energy and engagement you brought to today's session. As Damion said, like even before the session started, we had literally hundreds of questions. For Dr. Edwards, I've never seen that before in the half a dozen online programs that we've produced here. So credit to you guys. Thank you so much for hanging in there with all the technical difficulties, for all your interest and engagement. We really appreciate it. Most importantly, I'd like to just again thank Dr. Damion Thomas, our moderator, and my colleague. I'd like to thank Dr. Harry Edwards, legend, for just treating us to such a fascinating and inspiring conversation. And just looking ahead, we will post this video from today's program. We'll clean up some of the stuff on the beginning. We'll do some post-production. We will post that to the Lemelson Center's YouTube channel. And we do invite you to use the QR code you see here if you want to sign up for the Lemelson Center's e-newsletter. And we'll hope you check us out and join us for some more Lemelson Center programming in 2026 and beyond. And that concludes our program today. So thank you all so very much for participating today. And we hope you have a great afternoon. Thanks a lot.